I've been in the hydrogen sector for probably about the last 11, 12 years, very focused on the public sector, originally from Aberdeen City Council, so working on the original buses that we had back then. And then, as Ian pointed out, I joined the Scottish Citizens Alliance, seconded for 6.5 years, to lead on kickstarting the hydrogen economy. So very much focused on transportation and decarbonisation. And then latterly, I worked with Transport Scotland in their low carbon economy director, and that was really about, their focus was very much on the battery electric side, and then they were looking at how they could really start to fund hydrogen fuel cell technologies and also to build up the policy going forward. So back in 2019, the Scottish Government's programme for government, they committed to set up the Hydrogen Accelerator, and exactly as it says on the tin, it is to really accelerate the uptake of hydrogen technologies in Scotland and elsewhere in the UK and further afield. So we are actually funded through Transport Scotland. We were set up at the University of St Andrews, that's the lead partner, and Professor John Irvine is our chair. And with Professor Graham Burt from the University of Strathclyde, is deputy chair, and Dr. Jerry Agnew, he is our director. So we're quite a small team, so only about 7 of us in total. But we, as you can see from this diagram, we're cross-cutting across all sectors to really trying to bring this coordination together, to bring in that academic expertise to support SMEs who are trying to come into the sector. We're based actually at Eden Campus, which is an innovative hub there to really support these organisations to bring their products to market. We work very closely with Mission Scotland Innovation Park, which is the home of sustainable mobility. So very much that link right across the sectors, both public and private sectors, to really drive forward the ambitions for Scotland. The next slide, please. As you probably all know, Scotland has the most ambitious decarbonisation targets. Obviously, we're going 5 years before the rest of the UK to actually reach net zero by 2045. So very much that phasing out process has started, looking at decarbonisation of homes. For instance, new homes will have decarbonised heat. As mentioned earlier on, with SGN setting up at Methletown with 300 and odd houses, which will have hydrogen pumped into the gas grid to actually heat those homes, for instance, as one project. My focus has always been around the public sector, about supporting them, and you'll see that there's, on this diagram, that the public sector will start to decarbonise from 2025 onwards. So very much discouraging any new petrol diesel procurements for any of the fleet vehicles going forward. That provides us equally with an opportunity to look at the fleet profiles across all 32 local authorities in Scotland to see how we can look at joint procurement to build up that Scottish supply chain. We know there's not heavy fleet vehicles available right at this moment, so that has allowed us to actually develop projects for likes with Glasgow City Council, their decarbonisation strategy. They've put a stake in the ground that all their heavy fleet vehicles will be fuel cell electric. I heard that Dr. Ben Todd was speaking to you earlier from Alcoa Energies, and worked closely with Ben and his team and with their development of the refuse collection vehicle, which is literally the jewel in the crown in any local authority fleets. Glasgow particularly has a very high waste output, so we're talking about 380,000 tonnes a year. So very much those vehicles are really, really driven very, very hard. So fuel cell electric is absolutely perfect for that scenario. But not only is Glasgow their fleet strategy manager, who's ex First Bus Glasgow's CEO, so he brings a wealth of expertise in the transport sector. He's not only saying, right, we'd like to do fuel cell electric vehicles for the heavy fleet vehicles in Glasgow and the region, but we'd also like to rationalise our fleets at the same time, because there is going to be a price differentiation that those local authorities have got to try and hit. Again, that's a massive dilemma for them when they're trying to choose which technology they need to go for. So very much with colleagues, help and support to make that transition where the public sector can start to really look at how they can rationalise, looking at joint procurement, because collaboration is really, really key here. Obviously, health and safety comes into that as well. So very much our focus is really trying to support that transition going forward. Again, looking at the zero emission city centres by 2030, again, really trying to make that modal shift to encourage the general public to leave their cars at home, make that transition back on to buses and to trains that will be decarbonised as we move forward as well. Again, looking at the rail sector, so we were very fortunate to procure a Class 314 train that Ben mentioned earlier on. So that's owned by the University of St Andrews. That's been donated to Alcola Energy and the other project partners, Arab and Aegis and ARC, etc., to actually bring that project to life this year in time for COP. That will be our first hydrogen fuel cell electric train, which we'll be demonstrating at the heritage site at Bowness. But that's only phase 2. We will be continuing into phase 3, phase 4, and phase 5. And the other strategy around all this is about that conversion. If you've got assets sitting there, why can we not utilise them and, how can we say, strengthen their life of those particular modes of transport? So you're building up that circular economy, also building up that Scottish supply chain through the train project. We have got now 5 or 6 local companies that are involved who are manufacturing componentry, looking at the chairs, materials, all sorts of fantastic organisations coming to the fore, especially from the oil and gas sector. Again, with the transition from a very fossil fuel-led economy to a green economy, it's fantastic to have that skills and expertise coming into the hydrogen sector, where they can be utilised and really help us reach our targets. Again, with aviation, with the wealth of knowledge that Jerry Agnew brings to the team, being in Rolls-Royce for over 23 years, really helping the aviation sector again in Scotland. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just on our actual policy side, so with the Scottish Government, we had our assessment launched in December 2020. So this year, the Scottish Government will be launching their Hydrogen Action Plan in late summer, probably more like into autumn. And there will be about £100 million of public funding available to really help the uptake again of those hydrogen technologies in Scotland. Our role is really focused on the production of green hydrogen, and why would we not? With the abundance of offshore and onshore wind and solar, and the amount of water we have here, why would we not be really utilising those ingredients, not only for the UK market, but also potentially for European and global markets as well. So that's our target, is to really support bringing that green economy to the fore, not only for Scotland, but obviously for the UK as well. Next slide, please. I'm just going to give you just an example of some of the projects that we've been involved with. And it has certainly, there's been a massive uptake recently, and now it's about really that scalability. We've done all the novel small scale projects in the past, when I think about when I was back in Aberdeen City Council those years ago. Now it's really trying to get that coordination and really building up that scale. From the work we've been doing with Glasgow City Council, for instance, Whiteley, which is Scottish Power's wind farm, which is the biggest wind farm in Europe, they have now decided to reinvest in that wind farm along with ITM Power and BOC Landy to build a 20 megawatt electrolyser up there as well. We have all the hydrogen refueling infrastructure going into the city, both permanent and refueling, and now we're starting to build out the fleets in Glasgow, and now reaching out to the other 10 regional authorities to look at how we can collaborate, support them, and to make that transition. That's really allowing that type of 36 and 40 million pounds worth investment from private sector organisations to come in and feel confident that they will have the offtake from these types of organisations going forward. And it's not only just the public sector, very much that collaboration between private sector organisations. Looking at the heavy freight sector, for instance, there's a whole raft of organisations, clusters around Glasgow City that are also coming into a freight project that, in fact, Alcola Energy are leading on that with Arab, around those heavy fleet 44-ton lorries as well. Again, we recognise that these vehicles are just not available, but we cannot wait for them to, fall out of the sky sometimes in another 10 years. We have an opportunity, it's a market failure, so why don't we actually use that opportunity to work with the original engineering manufacturers, to design with the likes of Arcola Energy to do all that systems integration, to have those vehicles being prototyped, demonstrated and tested across the different sectors as we go forward.
Fiona, we probably need to wrap up.
Oh, do we? Right, okay, sorry about that. Okay, should I just go to my last slide? Is that all right?
Yeah, whatever you prefer. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I just thought I'd mention, sorry, one back, just about COP26. Fantastic opportunity for not only Scotland, but for the rest of the UK, for us to really just demonstrate the fantastic innovation that we've been doing in this sector, and look forward to seeing you all there in November. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Fiona. This is a chance for us to have our question and answer session now with the 4 speakers. If the 4 speakers can all turn their cameras on back again, please. We've got a few questions coming in, but please send in some more questions as we're going through the discussion. I just wanted to start off with a question from me, if people don't mind, which was, people here have talked about, I mean, you've all talked about very complex problems. And the modelling and the policy and even the characterisation all rely upon very complex interactions between different aspects. And what I was wondering here is, obviously there are things when you do this and you look at your models and you look at policy, there are things that you don't consider and you can't consider. It's beyond, if you like, the complexity. What I wanted to ask you is, what do you worry about? What do you think's missing from what you do? And what impact do you think it might have if you were to include it? So, I mean, it's open to anybody really, I think, that question.
I don't mind going first. I think my biggest concern is how we're going to afford to make this transition, how we would support the public sector, for instance. So part of our role is also looking at investable opportunities. If we get that scale right, that we will have investors coming forward to actually help us make that transition. So that's quite a big dilemma, you know, because the public purse can't take the total strain of making that transition to decarbonisation.
Yeah. What about Sheila?
I can say something about that. Yeah. I worry about people for a start. So we tend to make techno-economic models. We work out the cheapest method of decarbonising the economy, of building various types of hydrogen system at various times. You know, and that's all fine. And we have issues about spatial resolution and temporal resolution. And we can try to address those. So, for example, I have very low resolution in my model. Sheila has very high resolution in her model, but her model looks just at the hydrogen system mainly, whereas I always looks at the entire economy. So yeah, so there's trade-offs. There's always trade-offs. But I worry in all of that you have politics and you have people. So we essentially treat all the people in the country as if they're the same, but they're not. People have different means, they have different priorities, they have different needs, and all of those kind of diversities are not taken into account, but they're really, really important. So fuel poverty is a good example. I mean, it's really, really important for a minority of the population. We don't account for it in models, but actually for those people, it's absolutely critical.
I think this is something that worries economists as well, isn't it? I mean, is there, and I've seen some mention of this sort of recently. Are there ways that you feel you'll be able to tackle this in the future?
Yeah, I mean, so we are looking to try to understand whether it's possible to build models where we kind of stratify the population into groups and then try to look at the impacts on each group and the needs of each group. But actually getting the data to be able to do that and understanding the positions of those groups and what the options are is really important. And also we spend a lot of time. I guess the focus on GDP doesn't help as well. So a lot of the big question for politicians tends to be what level, how much in terms of GDP will it cost us to decarbonise the economy? Well, actually, if we start to stratify all the groups, and if we say, well, the best strategy for this group is this, but the best strategy for this group is something else, that will actually increase the total cost, but it might have better outcomes. But if you just have a focus on GDP, then it looks bad, when actually it's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Paul. Sheila, do you have any
yes, yeah. Sort of so I agree with Paul that I agree with Paul that yes. So it's very challenging to model consumer behavior, and many of these models assume that the actors are rational, but that is not how it is in real life. And another challenge is capturing all of the externalities, so identifying costs and benefits, not just economic costs and benefits, but environmental costs and social costs. Especially social costs are very difficult to quantify. For example, noise. How would you put a value on noise, for example? So with this kind of models, the important thing to remember is that asking the right question is the key. So the question will determine the level of detail that you need for the model. So if you're asking the right question, you don't have to include all of the details, all of the details. You just have to set the details enough in order to answer your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Sheila. Just another, again, a question for everybody, really. I think here, please, is that obviously you've got, again, in these complex systems, you've got technology, different technologies moving at different paces. You've got policy and different aspects of policy moving at different paces. Do you see a problem, or is there a role for you in trying to make sure that things move at the right pace so that you can integrate on the right timescales? How does it all work in terms of temporally, if you think, and integrating things at the right time? How do you deal with that?
I can comment on that. So we do have certainly, well, both Sheila and I, our models tend to work in time periods, and so we do say this is the target in this time period, this is the target in that time period, and we build infrastructure over time, and you see the amount of hydrogen
so I'm thinking it's also about politicians as well don't work to your timescales. How do you get them to work to your timescale so that, how do you, in the real world as well, how do you
so that's a real challenge. So you have to put innovation into your model in some way. And if I did this model, if I did it in the cheapest possible way to meet the 2050 target, it would just switch completely in the whole country to hydrogen in 2050 from fossil fuels. But that's not realistic at all. And so we need to work out how long we think innovation is going to take, and we need to limit the rate in which you switch. And you can do that from a technical perspective. So what's technically feasible, which might be quite short, and then you need to think about a cost perspective, training people to actually use technologies, training gas engineers, for example, if you want to use hydrogen, political decision making, timescales, and such like, and all of that extends it out. But most of that you have to try and do off model, and then parameterize it within the model itself. It's not something you can put in terms of a cost.
I would like to add something to that. So in terms of pacing, I think in some sectors, the pace that we need to achieve is quite obvious. For example, for the industry, we have to start now and we need to do it fast. So we don't have to do a lot of analysis or modeling for that. We just have to act. So I agree with Paul that these models do account for the different time periods. And you can analyze different scenarios to say if the deployment is this, how would it look like, what will be needed, what would be the impacts if we do it, if the investment periods are say every 5 years. So we do take into account that for some sectors we need to do it now, and we need to do it fast.
Okay. Fiona, did you have a comment?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think sometimes you just got to get things on the ground, and just we need to go at pace, and that's the hardest challenge. But collaboration, trying to really rather than herding cats, trying to bring organisations together to make that change is really key. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Sorry we didn't have any questions there for you, Martin. I guess we didn't have that much time for questions, I think, but at this point. But thank you for all of the speakers for this session. And now we're right on time to hand back to Nigel.